Hi, Bill Barber from Poliigon here. In this video we're going to be taking material from Poliigon.com and setting it up in Unreal. Before we get started though, let's take a look at the material we'll be using today. It's the wood flooring 044 material. I already have this saved to my hard drive and I'll include a link to it below this video. Okay, let's head over to Unreal. So this is the scene that we'll be using today. It's just a plane for our floor material to be assigned to once we've made it, and a HDR lighting setup, and that is about it. So yeah, let's get started on actually building up the material. But before we can do that, we do need to bring in the textures that we'll be using. So I'm going to go into my textures folder that I created here. You can see the HDRs already present, and I'm just going to click on import. And then what we need to do is find out where our Poliigon material is, and it's the wood flooring 044 material. I'm just going to go into the 4K folder there, and you'll see we've got 5 color maps. Now I'm only going to bring in the color, gloss, normal and reflection. We're not going to be touching on the displacement map today because that deserves a video all on its own, because we'll be making use of Unreal's tessellation for that. So just bring in those 4 maps and hit open. It will take a moment for Unreal to process those and bring them in. And when it has, we'll have a few adjustments to make to the textures before we can start building our material. You'll notice a little message down there saying that the normal map's been identified as a normal map, so that's good. It's doing some of the work for us. And the other thing we're going to need to adjust is the gloss map. So I'm going to double click on that. Just enlarge that. There we go. Now the change we need to make here is we need to uncheck sRGB. As a general rule, if a texture contributes towards the color of a material, you'd leave that checked. So the color texture and the reflection texture, we won't be turning that off because we want gamma corrections to be applied to those textures. But in the case of other textures like gloss maps, displacement maps, things of that nature, you do not want the gamma corrections applied. You want the raw detail, the raw information from that texture. That's why we uncheck this. So with that done, the only other change we're going to need to make is to go into the normal map, and then we need to actually type in, because there isn't a tick box for this, we need to type in, if you just type in the word green, you'll see a checkbox for flip green channel. Click on that. That's just to do with the way our normal maps have been encoded. We need to flip the green channel for them to display correctly in Unreal. So once you've done that, we now have our textures ready to go. So I'm now going to jump over to my materials folder, and I'm going to create a new material. And we'll call it wood floor 044. I'll double click on that, and that will take us into our node editor. There we go. Okay, so the first step now is to bring these the 4 textures we just made into the node editor. So to do that, I'm typing the word texture here and load up a texture sample. There we go. And at this point, I'm going to hit Control C and Control V and make a few copies because we need 4 of them. There we go. Now it's just a matter of going through each one and loading up the texture. So that's going to be our color texture. And you'll notice the sampler type is color. Good. This will be our reflection texture. That will also say color. Next is our gloss map. That's been identified as linear color because we changed that sRGB tick box. So that's a good way of making sure that's been done. And we'll also bring in our normal map where it will say normal because it automatically identified that as a normal map. Okay, so we're getting there. The next thing we're going to bring in is a 1- node. Now what that basically is an invert, because in the case of our reflection map and also our gloss map, we need to invert those for Unreal's shader system to use them properly. So the reflection map goes into specular like that after it's been inverted, and the gloss map goes into roughness, because once you invert a gloss map, it is in essence a roughness map. So that's why we do those inversions. The color goes straight into base color. No surprise there, and the normal map goes straight into normal. Excellent. And already you can see in the little preview here, if it decides to load up again, here we go, that our material is looking pretty good. Yeah. But we do have some changes we need to make. First thing is we have very little control over what this material is doing. We can't scale these textures, we can't do anything with them. So what we're going to do is move a little bit to the left here and create a texture coordinate node. Nope. It helped if I clicked on the correct thing. Texture coordinate. Thank you. So we've got a texture coordinate node now, and then we're also going to need a multiply node. I'll explain why in a moment. There we go. And a parameter node, a scalar parameter, that one. And we'll call this floor scale. There we go. And then we connect the texture coordinate into the multiply, and then the floor scale into the multiply, or the next option on it. And then we feed this into the UV coordinates of all our textures. Now you'll notice at the moment that our preview's just gone completely orange. And that's because we're currently scaling this texture by 0. Because the texture coordinate node is being multiplied by whatever value's in there. So if we set that multiply value to 1, it's going to be the default texture coordinates, i.e. what we had before. Oh, no, typing it in the wrong place. Default value, 1. There we go. And then we get our wood floor back. If I were to type it to 2, it would be scaled by 2. Yeah? And the reason we're doing this via a parameter here is because this can be utilized outside of this shader graph in your code or whatever else. So we'll be setting up quite a few of these little parameter nodes as we go, and it's important to name them properly so you know what it is they're doing. I'm also going to change these slider options to 0.1 and don't know, let's say 10, just to give you a nice range. You can always go outside that anyway, but that'll be a good sort of default range for that parameter to have. And for now, I'm going to leave that on 2, actually. Okay, so we now have our textures scaling. We have control over the scaling of our texture, which is good. The only other thing I want to address now is I'm just going to jump out of this for a moment, hit save, and then apply this material to our floor plane. Take a minute to come up. Now, one thing I'm instantly noticing when I take a look at it, it's looking quite good, but the reflections they're too blurry. This is supposed to be quite a shiny floor, and that's not the kind of effect I'm getting. So we are going to make a few adjustments to give us more control. So it's our roughness map that we need to adjust, which is that node here. And what we basically want to do is multiply the effects that roughness map is having. Okay, so we're going to bring in a multiply node, like so. Feed that into the top option, and then feed the output into roughness. And now what we can do is, if I show you directly on here, if I were to turn this multiply value to 0, that's multiplying the roughness texture by 0, i.e. it's not being rough in the slightest, and we get this perfectly shiny look. Yeah. Whereas the value we'll be aiming for is probably around a 0.7, which is just going to be a bit more shiny than the default. However, changing this value here will give us no control outside of the material. So we need to add in again a parameter, scalar, there we go, and we'll call this one roughness adjust. Go, and I'll feed that into option B, and then like before we can set the default value to 1, minimum to 0, and then we'll set the slider to 1. In fact, just because I for the purpose of demonstration, I'm going to change the default value to 7. There we go. Okay, so now if I come out of here and save that again, and we look at our material, we should notice, yeah, some nice shinier reflections compared to what we had before, which is good. Now in the next video we're going to be building on this material quite considerably to add in some surface imperfections and some more sort of general control over it, but for now I would say yeah, we're done. So in summary, we've taken a material from Poliigon.com and brought it into Unreal. We've set it up manually in the node editor and added in some controls over scaling and the general effect that the gloss map was having on the material.